We're now really getting to another exciting part of our program. In a moment, I will introduce the two gentlemen who will be sitting up here, and you're welcome to come up now, Mr. Ambassador, if you like. And Mr. Goldberg, please come up. Just a few introductory remarks. You don't want to hear me. You want to hear these two gentlemen. I know that. First, let me extend a warm welcome to Sally Oren, who is with us today. Thank you, Sally. Nice to have you with us. And to our other colleagues from Israel's embassy here in Washington, with whom we at the JCPA work so very closely. I'm not sure who is here, but certainly welcome. This section. Good. I see they're all on the left side of the room. That's pretty good. This is obviously a very challenging time for Israel and for the United States' relationship with Israel. Just some preliminary questions for you to be thinking about as we go into this program today. Will diplomacy, coupled with crippling economic sanctions, convince Iran to back away from its nuclear ambitions, or will other measures need to be utilized? What will happen in an apparently collapsing Syrian government and society, and how will this affect Israel's strategic equation to its north? Is Egypt headed toward a failed state status, or can we continue to count on the first country to make peace with Israel to be a steady partner in the region? Is the Israeli-Palestinian process salvageable? And finally, because it's most recent, what can we expect from the President's visit to Israel in the next few days? These issues arise against the backdrop of a second term for President Obama, with new Secretaries of State and Defense, an emerging but still unconfirmed Israeli government coalition after the elections 2 months ago, focusing not just on national security, but on difficult domestic issues as well. So in light of all of this, we thought it would be great today to have a program not only with the Israeli ambassador, who has been very gracious and generous with his time in past plenums, both here and in other cities, to come and talk to us, but to do a slightly different format today. Again, I will introduce them in a moment, but the format for today is basically a conversation. Ambassador Oren indicated that he would prefer this today as opposed to just making a speech to us, so that he will have an opportunity to interact, and we've invited noted author and journalist Jeffrey Goldberg to conduct that interview with him. Ambassador Oren not only accepted that, but enthusiastically endorsed it. At least he did before the interview takes place. So that's the format that you will see and hear this morning, and then following that, hopefully there will be time for questions from the floor. I would ask in advance, we have microphones set up here, so if you choose to speak or have a question, please make a question out of it and not a comment or an editorial, and please introduce yourselves when you come to the microphone, giving the name and the city or organization that you represent. Again, to reiterate what Jane said as a housekeeping issue, if you have a cell phone or other electronic device with you, please turn it off or turn it to silent mode. Thank you. First, let me say a few words about our ambassador. Ambassador Oren is a noted scholar and author. His two most recent books, 6 Days of War, June 1967, and The Making of the Modern Middle East, and Power, Faith, and Fantasy, America in the Middle East from 1776 to the present, are bestsellers and national award winners. He has received fellowships from a number of distinguished institutions of higher learning and has served with distinction in the IDF. He has been a superb ambassador for Israel, representing not just his government, but also the people of Israel. And he, on a more personal level, he has been a very true friend and partner of the JCPA. Jeffrey Goldberg is the award-winning national correspondent for The Atlantic magazine and a regular columnist for the Bloomberg View. His book, Prisoners, A Story of Friendship and Terror, was named a top book of the year by numerous publications. He has interviewed numerous leaders in this country and in the Middle East and other parts of the world, and frequently appears on national televisions and news shows. Mr. Goldberg truly has become one of our country's authoritative journalists on a variety of topics, especially current issues in the Middle East. As I've said, this will be an open discussion and interview between Mr. Goldberg and Ambassador Oren, and then there will be time for questions after that. So without further ado, Mr. Goldberg, please begin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to jump right in this morning, just so you know a couple of things. This is not our first rodeo. We've done this numerous times. Our friendship, which pre-existed his appointment, has more or less maintained, I think. Sometimes less, sometimes more. Survived.
My appointment.
Their friendship is never in existential doubt. And I always enjoy talking to I'll call him the ambassador up here. I usually refer to him as Michael, or sometimes worse. But I do enjoy talking to him because he has the depth of knowledge that very few diplomats have. My hope, of course, is that once he leaves this position, whenever that may be, that he goes back to doing the work that I think all of us have found so useful and enlightening. The Six-Day War book, the history of the American relationship with the Middle East. And I think after he comes out of this job, he'll have a new perspective on the American relationship with the Middle East. But why don't we, let's just talk very briefly about what's going on in the next week or two, and then we could talk about, we could start back with King David and then work our way forward, as we usually do.
Yeah.
The president is going finally, as numerous people have pointed out. It's taken a while, but he's going to Israel. Can you give us a preview of what is going to happen physically on the ground and what you actually hope will come out of this trip?
Thank you, Jeffrey. Sometimes you call me neighbor. We live around the corner from one another. Good morning, everybody. Just a quick word. Thanks again to JCPA. When I came to this job now 4 years ago, I met with Stephen and Martin, and I said to them one word, which was help. Help me navigate the shoals and squalls of American Jewry, because I had not really lived in this country for a quarter of a century. And the American Jewish community that I had left in the 1970s wasn't the same American Jewish community that I found in the beginning of the 21st century. And you've been a great help for me, always. And that's why I always come back every year to JCPA and talk with you and talk with your board. And it's a great honor and privilege to me, and thank you, still. President Obama, it didn't take him that long. Certainly not in a historical context. Not many American presidents have actually visited Israel. And President Reagan, an outstanding friend of Israel, never went at all. George Bush only went in the last 6 months of his second term. The fact that this is the first trip abroad of the president in his second term is very significant. That he's chosen the state of Israel out of over 190 countries in the world is, for us, a source of great pride, and we're delighted that he's coming. He'll be coming for a long period of time for a presidential visit, about 2 days. With a 5-minute, that's a long time for a president to spend in one country of the size of the state of New Jersey. It's a long time. And he'll, with 5 hours off for a visit to Ramallah and then proceeding on to Jordan. The trip has there are a number of issues that will be on the table. Of course, the Iranian issue, attempts to reanimate the peace process, to induce the Palestinians back to the negotiating table for where they have not been willing to sit for now nearly 4 years. To grapple with other regional issues, Egypt, Syria. But above all, the purpose of the trip is to send a message. It's to send a message to the people of Israel. It's to send a message to the people of the Middle East and the world about the vibrant and a profoundly deep relationship between the United States and the state of Israel and the people of Israel. And it comes at a very opportune time, at a time of profound instability throughout the region. Instability that really has certainly been without precedent in the last century, and Israelis need reassurance. It gives us the ability to withstand some of these issues. It gives us greater flexibility in handling some of these issues. It's a very important message, and I think that when Israelis meet President Obama, and not just through the filter of the media, but actually come in contact with him, that I think that will have an immediate and very positive effect on our relationship. The itinerary, such as it stands now, and it hasn't been published yet, so I won't get into great detail, will reflect that goal. The reflect will be to give the maximum amount of interaction between the president and the people of Israel. There'll be some ceremonial actions that will have meaning, especially for the people of Israel.
Is he going to lay a wreath not only at Rabin's grave, but at Herzl's?
I don't want to confirm it, but understand that when you lay a wreath, when a foreign leader leaves a wreath at Herzl's tomb, that means something to the people of Israel. It also means some people of the Middle East. We have our own codes. We're half the time talking in codes. So what does it mean? The Arab narrative has been that the state of Israel came into existence because of the Holocaust.
Well, excuse me, but it's not only the Arab narrative. If you listen to the Cairo speech in 2009 by President Obama, he himself used the Holocaust as the predicate.
I will reiterate: it's the Arab narrative, and if you look at Ibn Saud's conversation with Franklin D. Roosevelt in February 1945, Ibn Saud says to Roosevelt, "Well, hey, the Europeans killed a bunch of Jews, and then you dumped them in our backyard. What's that about? Why should we have to pay for Germany's mistakes?" And so that's a narrative. That narrative is an express trip to an unending conflict in the Middle East. Because unless the Arabs internalize at least this part of our narrative, that we are native to the Middle East, that this is our homeland for 3,000 years, and that we aren't aliens to this part of the world, we aren't interlopers, then there'll never be an end to the conflict. And so when you lay a wreath at Herzl's grave, you're laying the wreath at the author of the Judenstaat, the Jewish state, and a man who wrote this a half century before the Holocaust. And that is sending a very profound message. If you visit anything to do with the Jewish past, which is the Jewish street path from 2,000, 3,000 years ago, in Israel, you're sending a message about Jewish connectedness to the land.
Is this an opportunity for the president to, from the Israeli perspective, correct the mistake of the 2009 Cairo speech by acknowledging a pre-existing Jewish connection to the land?
I wouldn't call it an opportunity to correct a mistake. It would be the opportunity to send a message to the peoples of the region that the Jewish people is indigenous to the Middle East, and that we have a millennia-long connection to this area of the land, and that we aren't interlopers, and in fact, we weren't created as a result of a mistake made by the Europeans, quote unquote, and that we're here to stay, and that the only basis, it ties directly in to our expectation, and it's not a precondition, it's an expectation that the outcome of the peace process will result in mutual recognition between us and the Palestinians. We will recognize that there is a Palestinian people. Actually, we have recognized the Palestinian people going back to the Oslo Accords in 1993, which talk about the existence of a Palestinian people, and that they, as a people, have an unassailable right to self-determination in the land they regard as their ancestral homeland, Palestine. And that will be the basis of our recognition of the Palestinian state. We need them to recognize Israel as the Jewish state, the Jewish nation state, the nation state of the Jewish people, because that means that they recognize us as a people having the same reciprocal right of self-determination, which is equally unassailable in the land we regard as our homeland. And only on that basis can there be actually permanent and legitimate peace. If not, you'll have one side of the conflict that will have continuing irredentist claims on the other. There will not be an end of claims and end of conflicts, and it will just go on. The two-state solution will become what Barack called the two-stage solution, the second stage being Israel's dissolution.
So you're not confirming for us that he is going to Herzl's grave?
I'm not confirming you that you are going to. You may, though.
Thank you very much. Is that
you have?
Let me ask you this. When I was staying in the Holocaust for one more second, does he have to go to Yad Vashem?
Yes, there's a protocol. There's certain things. There's certain boxes you have to check off. That a foreign leader has to come. He has to go to the Yad Vashem.
Why?
Or she.
Why at this point?
You know something? It's a good question. There are other places where there's a certain amount of leeway where they go or not, and Yad Vashem is pretty much de rigueur. And
I wouldn't recommend to this
Anwar
president.
Anwar Sadat went to Yad Vashem.
Right.
Remember, when he first arrived in Israel in November 1977, went right to Yad Vashem.
But you feel like you're going to get him in touch with the Israeli present also.
Yes.
I mean, that's the main goal. Mm-hmm. Do you expect some sort of, and I want to go to the politics of it for a minute, do you expect some sort of new flowering of understanding between the Prime Minister and the President on Iran and maybe other issues as well?
I think that we have
And tell us the truth about their relationship while you're at it.
we have a significant blossoming of understanding on many issues. It's not just
it's a flowering and a blossoming.
No, I don't. You know, this is going to ruin your morning, but not everything you read in the press is true. And
it doesn't ruin my morning.
And you know, the president and the prime minister have now met each other 9 times as president and prime minister. They met each other before that. President Obama says that he has spoken with Benjamin Netanyahu more times than any other foreign leader. I've been present at all of these meetings. Their relationship is open, candid, often very funny. It is very substantive, and it doesn't mean we have agreed on everything, and there have been disagreements, certainly on issues relating to settlements in Jerusalem. We've had an ongoing and very intimate dialogue about the Iranian issue. And I can say on every issue we are confronting in the Middle East, we are far closer today than we were 4 years ago. And that's why you don't hear so much about it. And also journalists are frustrated. They don't hear so much about it anymore. I think there is a deep understanding about a common frustration, let me phrase it that way, in the Palestinian refusal to return to the negotiating table in spite of some very significant efforts that were made last summer.
You think the president feels that frustration?
Sure. The president stood with us in the UN, both in using his first ever veto in the Security Council to stop a Palestinian-led effort on the settlement issue, and then last November in the General Assembly on the attempt to, unilaterally declare Palestinian statehood, getting the territory without the peace, getting Palestinian statehood recognized by the General Assembly. The president stood beside us. He understood that what the Palestinians were trying to do was end-run the negotiating process. And he understands full well that the only way to true peace is if we actually sit each other across that table and work out our differences. It hasn't happened. It hasn't happened in spite of some very good faith efforts on our part, on the Jordanians' part, to bring the Palestinians to the table. Now, the reasons they don't come to the table, many of them have nothing to do with us. The mainstay of Abu Mazen for many years was Hosni Mubarak. He is no more. Abu Mazen would never take a step forward without consulting with the Arab League. Arab League is almost no more. It's in disarray. So he finds himself, in many ways, flapping out in the wind politically. So it's not all about us. And it's difficult and it's frustrating. So we have a better understanding about that. On the Syrian situation, very deep understanding. We understand that the threat posed by the Syrian chemical arsenal, which is the largest and probably most diverse chemical arsenal in the world. On the Egyptian issue, we face common challenges. We have been very supportive of the administration's position to continued aid to Egypt because it's a stable and economically prosperous, probably be a hyperbolic word, economically surviving.
Non-disastrous.
Non-disastrous. Egypt is in our interest, and that in the face of growing opposition in Congress, both from sort of the Tea Party wing of the Republican Party and the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, for different reasons, are increasingly reluctant to see increased American aid to Egypt. And on the Iranian issue, certainly since Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech in the General Assembly in September of last year, where everyone remembers the bomb with the red line.
Was that your idea?
No, it was, I did have
just checking. Just wanted to check. Thought I would get you real quick there on that one.
So they got those headlines, didn't it? The only problem with it tended to obscure sort of the takeaway line of the whole speech. The most important line of the whole speech was it's not important when Iran gets a bomb, or even when Iran decides it wants to get a bomb. The only important question is when we can no longer prevent Iran from getting a bomb.
That's been a stable line of his.
And I think on the basis of that line, we have entered into a very quiet and intense dialogue with the United States.
I want you to talk about. I mean, you've been here for 4 years now, and I want you to talk about the American Jewish community and its relationship to Israel. But before you do, there's just one other. Could you give us an example of one of the humorous exchanges between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Obama? Do they go blue? I mean, what is it? What are they joking about?
I'm trying to think of a good one. That's a very good question.
Well, you brought it up.
My notes, but they are fun. They're funny.
One day we'll find that they're
smart,
just
pragmatic.
So when they're scowling at each other in public, that's just to cover up the wit and camaraderie behind that. All right, I just want to clarify as much as we can that. Can you talk about? And we were just talking about this.
This is just like being on Colbert. You have to smile, roll with it.
It's not like being.
I'm good at that.
No,
it was actually my warm-up act.
You were good.
This week.
Yeah, that's right. 4 years ago, when you got here, shortly after you got here, you told me something that I thought was very, very interesting. I said, "What's the biggest surprise so far of your job?" Remember, you're walking into a tumultuous situation where you have a right-leaning prime minister, a left-leaning president. It's a very, very unstable situation in many ways. And you said the most surprising thing is that, and you hadn't been here for about 20 years in any regular sort of way. The most surprising thing is that you have to explain now to Jews why they should support Israel. Not non-Jewish Americans, but you had to explain to Jews. Can you give us, just in a couple of minutes, sketch out what you now understand about the level of support for Israel among American Jews? I'm less interested right now in Congress and in the broader public, but talk about that, because we all feel something going on. If you're coming from the left or from the center left, you think it has a lot to do with Israeli policies on the West Bank. If you're coming from the right, you think it has to do with a hostile president or assimilation. Give us in a couple of minutes sort of your understanding of what's happening in this community as it relates to Israel.
Again, it was sort of a Rip Van Winkle effect for me, because Sally and I had not really lived in this country for 25 years. And in spite of coming off and teaching here, living in the country and interacting with the community in depth was a real shock for me. I left a country whose slogan and I see William Duroff out there, the slogan for UJA back when I left was "We are one." All right, remember that one? Could we get away with that one today? And we are many. And go figure out where. And the American Jewish community had gone in different directions. It was divided among several lines. There was a basic religious division, Orthodoxy, conservative, and Reform. Reform also dividing into several subsections. There was a political polarization which reflected the more broader schisms in Israeli and American politics between left and right. On the Israeli issue, it was a byproduct of a new generation that didn't remember the Six-Day War, certainly didn't remember 1948. Even the Holocaust, the role of the Holocaust was changing in this society. I grew up reading Philip Roth and Bernard Malamud and Saul Bellow. All those books can be summarized in one sentence. How do we, as Jews, also be Americans? How can we reconcile our Jewish identity with our identity as members in a modern American society? Young Jews today reading those books don't even know what those questions mean. It would be complete, I read Portnoy's Complaint when I was 21. You give Portnoy's Complaint to a 21-year-old today and they say, who's this? What's this guy talking about? What's the problem with being American Jewish? Of course we're American. Even Orthodoxy today, and Orthodoxy even in small communities, they're American. American Jews can be anything today. I mean, when we grew up, I grew up during a period when there was quota systems in elite schools, and the thought of Jews serving in the State Department was unthinkable. The State Department, they take Yom Kippur off now. It's amazing. Get kosher food in the basement. So much has changed.
The regular food is on the first floor. The kosher food they keep in the basement, but it's getting somewhere.
So much has changed. So much has changed, and so the role of Israel has changed. And then, the controversies, the first Intifada, second Intifada, Lebanon in particular was a watershed period.
82 Lebanon?
82 Lebanon.
82
Lebanon, sure. And so much had changed here. And coming here, again, talking to JCPA and saying, guys, okay, help me navigate this, because this is not the community that I remembered, was very significant. Now, not all of it, you cannot generalize about any of it. As an AJC poll came out and showed that support and affection by and for young American Jews for Israel remains very, very high. It's in the 70 percentiles. And there's certainly, there's a generational component to it. There is a religious component to it. I think that before, in one of our many road shows, I said that the American Jewish community is very similar to what some physicists say about the universe. It's expanding and contracting at the same time. It's contracting due to assimilation, but it's expanding at a core as more and more young American Jews come through a Jewish day school system that almost didn't exist when we were kids. Orthodox Jews are accounting for a greater percentage of the American Jewish community. New York City has now had several years of positive Jewish growth, something it hadn't known for decades, and it's almost all exclusively because of the Orthodox Jewish community, and increasing Orthodox involvement in Israel issues. That was an interesting tablet article the other day about the rising participation of modern Orthodox Jews in AIPAC. And those of us who were at AIPAC last week saw, simply by counting the number of kippot around the room, that this had grown exponentially. We had a very unusual event in Capitol Hill last week, about a week before, event in honor of the Iron Dome system and in memory of Senator Dan Inouye, who did so much to make that Iron Dome system possible. 30 leaders of Congress and the Senate came and spoke at this event, and it was hosted by a Haredi group from Borough Park. Exactly. Really, as my grandma would say, ich weiß. Very different. The rise of J Street, as a phenomenon, didn't exist certainly when I was here. Everyone understands the need for Jewish influence and Jewish power. There's no reticence about exhibiting that power and exercising that power, bringing that influence to bear, though they can't agree what's the purpose of the power. It was interesting to see whether there's an increasing Orthodox involvement in J Street as it comes up. There was, an article in the Jewish press saying that in contrast to AIPAC, which offered Jewish kosher food for 12,000 participants, that J Street hadn't offered a kosher option at its convention. I don't know if it's true or not, but I think they should seriously contemplate having a two-plate solution.
Wait, have you been... You've been planning that joke all morning, right? It's so pathetic.
You think you're the only one who gets to set up people? No.
Thank God you didn't use that on Colbert, really.
They tell you not to be funny.
Eating you alive.
Right. So it's one thing I can say. It's a challenge that we at the embassy and the state of Israel broadly cannot afford to ignore. We can't. Yeah, birthright's a tremendous success. Yes, support among American Jews is higher than anybody anticipated for Israel, but we can't ignore it. And there are definite issues. There are issues related to conversion, to the kotel. There are issues that arise out of our relationship with the Palestinians and where the quagmire in which the peace process finds itself. So we are trying to be proactive all the time. One of the programs that I've instituted is a series of tables of tishes around the country. The first one was held in Los Angeles several months ago. We've had another one at the embassy. We've had another one under the auspices of AIPAC, where rabbis from different streams of Judaism, Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, Reconstructionists, and at one point we even had a Haredi rabbi around the table, sit around the table. So last year at Detroit, when I was with you, I talked about the need to have tables. Well, it's actually happened. And, as everything else in my world, it takes a long time. It took about a year to get them up and running. But these tables have been fascinating. They're not what you expect. There's about 20 minutes of profound, sort of uncertainty and edginess. And then people begin to open up. And it turns out that these rabbis have a lot more in common than you might think. Some of the Orthodox rabbis, modern Orthodox rabbis, talked about their problems with conversion in the state of Israel and their problems with the central rabbinate. And all of a sudden there's a dialogue that goes on. There's a communality that exists between the Reform and the Conservative and the Orthodox. There are interesting, and one of my big points has been to stress that before American Jewry can come to Israel and say we want Israel to relate a certain way to us as American Jews, that American Jews have to work out their issues between each other. The kotel is a very good example, because at the kotel, not everything that would be accepted even by a Reform community would be respected by a Conservative community. There's differences, and we all agree that the kotel is. What we can agree is the kotel is sacred space. All right, we've been reading in the last two parashot about the sacred space of the temple. It's a sacred space. It's different. Not everything that's permissible in a public space is permissible in a private space. In a sacred space, not everything is permissible in a public space. Right? You can't act and dress any way you want in the public. So we have to have this dialogue amongst, the American Jewish community has to have this dialogue amongst itself before it comes to Israel and say, this is what you want to do. But again, the last line is, Jeffrey, is that we cannot afford to be passive about this. and we cannot take for granted the we are one type of attitude toward Israel and the Jewish people that existed here 25 and 30 years ago, because that has changed.
Much of the effort on the part of the, let's call it broadly, the delegitimization movement in this country, and it's still a marginal movement, but it's certainly grown in the last 5 or 10 years. Much of the energy comes from its Jewish spokesmen. I mean, obviously, if you're starting an anti-Israel movement, it's best to recruit Jews to do the speaking for that movement, and they've had some success. Where does that come from? I mean, because it's not necessarily a phenomenon that we ever experienced growing up here. Where do these anti-Zionist Jews come from? And what responsibility, if any, does Israel have in creating unease, anxiety, even embarrassment about Israel in the American Jewish community?
I'm so much not going to go into this.
That's just a preface to going into it.
No, there's obviously, I have great frustrations in that that a significant number of the people who are on a regular basis criticizing Israel, criticizing Israel not just in any particular policies, but really setting the tone for BDS and our wholesale legitimization do come from the American Jewish community, and I have
how big a phenomenon is
why.
it to you? How big do you feel it in the day-to-day?
We feel it in the day-to-day because we're reading the same publications. I mean, it's not necessarily you go out to American Jewish communities in suburban Connecticut or the Midwest, and you're going to encounter this on a large scale. But it is particularly pronounced in the media and in certain branches of the media, and so we encounter it. We encounter situations where Netanyahu's Prime Minister Netanyahu always says that there's 3 standards in the world. There's a standards for non-democracies, there's a standards for democracies, and there's a standards for Israel. And I'd say the same thing about American Jewish community. I'll give you a small example. The flotilla incident, May 2010. Israel undertook an operation. It was controversial. It resulted in the deaths of 9 Turks, but we submitted it to international arbitration of the UN. We had to have our heads examined for doing this. And then a modern miracle happened. We should actually conduct a Jewish holiday around it, where the UN found in our favor. They tried to condemn us. They failed. Let's eat. They found that they upheld the legality of our maritime blockade of Gaza. They held that our soldiers had acted in self-defense, though they hadn't acted in self-defense in the most efficient way. And we offered. They asked Israel to express regret for the deaths of the 9 Turks and to pay compensation to their families. We accepted all of these. The Turks, alas, rejected all of them, but we accepted all of them. The week of the flotilla, Israel came under, from my perspective, unprecedented criticism in the American press. The New York Times ran 2 half-page op-eds written by prominent spokesmen of the American Jewish community, intellectuals, that accused us of everything from moral perfidy to turpitude to stupidity. It was a long article about Israeli stupidity. That same week, American forces in Afghanistan killed several dozen Afghani civilians. I think one was at a wedding party. Was there a peep from the American Jewish community about that? A peep. Did anyone come out and write half-page op-eds about what American forces had done by accident? Not necessarily in self-defense. In Afghanistan, there was different standards. The American Jewish community had a different standard for Israel than it had for its own country. I see it again and again and again, whether it's articles that have been written. We had a very prominent paper, for which I have great respect, write 3 very critical articles of Israel's handling of our illegal immigration issue in the South within a 6-month period, all of which depicted that issue as a question of refugees from Africa. They are not refugees from Africa. 85% of them are men looking for work and crossing a border illegally. Those same American Jews who were writing about this and being very critical of our handling of what was a very complex issue were using a different standard than their own standard of their own immigration issues in southwestern United States, where no one is referring to those people as refugees. So we're dealing with that as well. But again, it's in a small area.
Just pause on this and let's drill down for a second, because I think people in this community, especially who confront this every day in their cities, want to understand what underlies all of this. Is this just what you're talking about, the permanent Jewish condition? In other words, that Jews and the Jewish state will always be judged more harshly by a hostile world? Is it something that's fixable? Can you actually shift the narrative? Or what are we talking about? You confront it every day. What's your analysis of the root of it? Is it as simple as endemic anti-Semitism? Is it underlying queasiness about the ideas that the Jews have reformed themselves into a country? Is it Israeli mistakes?
Okay. Well, there are three different questions to three different answers. Looked at it from a historical perspective, the percentage of the American Jewish community who supports the idea of a sovereign Jewish state in the land of Israel is much higher today than it was, say, in the 1920s or even the 1930s. Well into the 1940s, the major American Jewish organizations were not Zionist. And it took the Holocaust to shake them out. We're now commemorating the 7th anniversary of the Madison Square Garden performance of the Hillel Crook group, right? And 9 Palestinian Jews who were sent here by Jabotinsky in 1940 to sort of to mobilize the American Jewish community in the face of World War II and later in the Holocaust. And they were slammed by the American Jewish community here, by the American Jewish leadership. It's a very painful story to read, very painful. And so this is not a new phenomenon. And I think that today is the percentage of American Jews who do not accept the notion of a sovereign Jewish state in the land of Israel is much, much smaller than it was 70, 80, 90 years ago. So that's one. Can I get the second question? Does it have to do with Israeli policies? Yes, there's certainly the role of Israeli policies. We're in a much more complex environment than we were when we grew up. When we grew up, Israel was facing Arab armies with people who wore uniforms and sat in tanks and fought in the desert. Now we're dealing with terrorist groups, with nebulous, what for American Jews are nebulous theologies that fight with, are ununiformed and fight within neighborhoods and fire rockets at our neighborhoods. It's a completely different set of parameters we're dealing with. Nothing is black and white anymore. Nothing. We're dealing with 70,000 rockets in Hezbollah. Many of them, if not most of them, are placed within homes, within households, because they know that when we go to strike them, we are going to kill the families in those houses. They want those families killed in that way, because they have not only a military strategy, they have a media strategy. We're dealing with a 24-hour media that has driven news to heights that we can't, that where things happen that in a battlefield situation which are manipulated by Hezbollah and Hamas and immediately become facts, whether it be the schoolhouse that we allegedly hit in Gaza in 2009, where the media immediately came out, Hamas said that we killed 52 school children. That was immediately repeated. It became fact. Surprisingly, that fact was repeated in a book that I read this week by a very esteemed Middle Eastern scholar, not someone who's anti-Israel. But the problem is it never happened. There were 9 people killed in that incident, and 9 of them were from Hamas. They were mortar crew. We just had a situation this week. Aaron, can I talk about this? A prominent picture, too late now, a prominent picture that came out in the front page of many papers during the last fighting in November in Gaza, showing a Palestinian father mourning over the body of his son, surrounded by mourners around it. You know the picture. It was named by many people as one of the emblematic pictures of 2012. The headline was a Palestinian father mourning his son killed by an Israeli air raid. And we had questions about it at the time. We couldn't stop it. It took many months to investigate it. But now the UN has come out and said that kid was probably killed by a Hamas rocket that fell short. And the people in the picture knew it. Hamas knew it. But they sold the picture to the Western press. And now we have to deal with that. That's driven by a news cycle. How have you
gotten the UN to be so stridently pro-Israel? You've done a really remarkable job.
And you have to. And these are responsible news agencies. But then there are the irresponsible news agencies. There's news agencies that will employ well-known anti-Semitic tropes and apply them to Israel. And they are, to quote, to paraphrase Larry Summers, that they aren't maybe anti-Semitic in intent, but they're certainly anti-Israel and anti-Semitic in effect because they promote delegitimization on a grand scale. Pinkwashing, case in point. What's the trope there? Anybody knows pinkwashing here? Pinkwashing was an article that appeared in the New York Times, I guess maybe 2 years ago, by a professor no one had ever heard of.
From the University of Staten Island.
University of Staten Island, saying that Israel has a very liberal attitude, very policies toward the LGBT community. It's been one of the great honors I've had in this job to appear repeatedly for the LGBT community. I gave the keynote address at the LGBT annual conference last year. We do have a lot to be proud of, but we are doing this according to the pinkwashing thesis. We're doing this in order to camouflage our oppression of the Palestinians. Now, if you study the history of anti-Semitism, you know that an anti-Semitic trope is that when Jews are doing something good, they're doing something good in order to do something evil. Classic. Or the notion that Israel has bought seats in Congress in order to get Congress to support Israel. Jews buy political information. It is what it is. If you view it historically, it is something that anti-Semites have used against us, and now being applied to Israel. And this is, what can I say? It's very disturbing as a phenomenon. I see it again and again.
We're going to go to questions in a minute, but just let me follow this up by asking the question that you hear from the center to the left, and I hear this all the time, which is from people who support Israel, who believe in the mission of Israel, who want it very much to be a safe and successful country, who say, can't the Israelis do a better job helping themselves? Which is to say, over and over again, and I think people in this audience confront this, you're talking about Joe Biden is in Israel, so let's have a settlement announcement, coincidentally at the same time,
Right.
We know the litany of examples. The issues at the Kotel are issues that can profoundly alienate the non-Orthodox segment of American Jewry. It seems, and I'm not just talking off my head here, I spent a lot of time reporting on this and talking to Jewish leaders across the country about this. It seems as if the narrative is in part, I wish they would be a little bit more sensitive to the unfair playing field that they have to deal with,
right,
and understand that any mistake that's made is going to get magnified, and it's going to be up to us, not the ineffective Israeli consulate 400 miles away, but up to us to have to defend what doesn't really sound defensible. And so the question is, in a way, when the cabinet is meeting, when the prime minister is making decisions, does he understand that American Jewry, in particular, American Jewry, is part of the national security structure, in a way, of the state of Israel? Mm-hmm. And that if you make life miserable, in 1967 and Entebbe and in many cases, Israel's been a source of great pride for American Jews, and that's been always able to exploit that pride. I'm not using exploit in a negative way, but take advantage of that pride. Today, you hear more and more people saying, I don't understand the Israelis. I want to love them, but I don't understand what they're doing. Obviously, this comes up in issues related most often to settlements on the West Bank and the perception that this prime minister is not trying as hard as he could. We'll deal with the reality in a second, please do. But talk to me about how your government understands American Jews and their role, and how to make them more effective and happier about playing that role.
Well, the Prime Minister in particular understands this because he spent so much of his formative years here and his university education here and understands America very well. He gets this, and he gets it in the most visceral, profound way. I can give you two examples, both that will resonate with this audience, is the conversion law, the Rotem law, and later the issue of the Kotel. In both cases, the Prime Minister understood that this was not just a matter between American Jewry and Israel, but a matter between the United States and Israel. In both cases, he formed a commission, as it happened, both under the auspices of Natan Sharansky, and Natan will be issuing his findings about the Kotel shortly, and understood and took immediate action. You don't hear about the Rotem law anymore. For many Israelis, though, who didn't have a strong association with this country, don't fully appreciate this, and this is something we have to do as part of our educational role at the embassy and come back and explain to them. And by the way, it's not just about American Jews. We had issues in the past of Christians being abused in the Old City, and that had an immediate effect there. And I had to go and talk to rabbis in Israel and say, you know, someday there may be negotiations over Jerusalem. You may not want to have the first people in line to come up and say that Jews don't respect other religions in Israel, being our Christian friends in the United States. And it sunk in. They got it. They got it, and for the most part, it stopped. So we are a country that's far away. Not everyone wakes up in the morning and thinks, you know, what does America think about what we are doing here? There are people who take their divinely, what they believe to be their divinely ordained right to the land of Israel quite seriously, and believe that that's the essence of what Israel is, why it exists, why the Jews still exist, because we take God's promises very seriously. And it's very difficult to tell them that they have to give up this divinely given providence to satisfy an American public opinion. That's a difficult sell. It's not an impossible sell. It's a difficult sell. Beyond that, trying to convey our reality. We had a difficult run-up to the Israeli election, where much of the mainstream press here leaped to the conclusion that there was going to be a right-wing landslide. Remember this? And it was extraordinary to me.
Well, the polls were showing that.
No, the polls were showing many things, but they were only looking at one part of the polls. They weren't showing that the Labor Party, that had 3 seats the previous year, was now up around 14, 15 seats. No one's looking at that, and no one's looking at the middle range. And I'm not bringing this up just to, you know, express my frustration with some of the polls. It was because there's such a gap in our experiences of the last 10, 15 years. And I think the last time I spoke to JCPA in Detroit, I talked about the experience gap of the last 10, 15 years between American jury and Israeli jury. And your experience in the last 15 years has been everything from, you know, Iraq, Afghanistan, 9/11, political polarization, but an increasing success and integration in the American Jewish community. Our experience has been 2 major impacts of a population which per capita is the largest, youngest population in the world for an industrialized, modernized country, bigger than this country's, under the age of 30. Israelis under the age of 30 have had 2 profound experiences since 2000. One is as terror, withdrawal from southern Lebanon, withdrawal from Gaza, and the firing of thousands of rockets at our cities. 2 attempts to make peace with the Palestinians that were rejected, and in one case rejected with suicide bombers, the death of over 1,000 Israelis in suicide bombers. It has a profound effect on the Israeli population, and you can't overlook it. And the other historical transformation has been Israel's movement from being a small, largely lower middle class socialist country to being a small middle and upper class, less than socialist country, and all the social and economic dislocations that come between it. So if you look at those 2 transformative experiences, you will have Naftali Levi's party and you'll have Yair Lapid's party, right there. And most of the people voting for it, and Naftali, I always say that, Naftali Levi is an old friend.
Naftali Lapid, we are one.
We are one. Naftali Levi, we are one. Naftali Bennett's party, and you'll have Yair Lapid's party.
We've grafted one onto the other.
And these are the people who are voting for them are overwhelmingly under 30.
Right.
Under 30. No one was looking at that because no one wants to look very, very deeply at our reality here. And it's the flip side of your thing. How come no one's looking deeply at American reality in Israel? I think we have a 2-way problem.
If you have questions, please go in and line up. I just want to take a point of personal privilege for a second. I know that there's a lot of talk and speculation about whether you're sticking around. And I'm going to overstep my bounds as a journalist, but recognizing that our friendship was a pre-existing condition. I hope, and I think it's my personal hope, and I think it's the hope of many, many people in the American Jewish community that you stick around a while longer. And
thank you.
So why don't we come right here?
Okay.
So there's two
Thank you.
mics right
Yeah.
behind each
Mike's
other.
back here.
Yeah, there's two mics.
You have a
We'll
number
go the front
around your
mic
head.
first.
I can't see you at all.
It's a
So.
very
That's
Israeli
more-
kind of setup,
Really?
actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, both
my
mics.
name
So we'll
is
go to
David
the front and
Bowman.
then back and front and back.
Right.
My name is David Bowman. I'm from St. Louis, and obviously Israel is located in a very dangerous neighborhood. And one of the things I'd like you to address is the security challenges presented by what's going on in Syria and how that's impacting Israel.
We did that a little bit.
Several years ago, well in advance of the outbreak of internecine strife in Syria, I accompanied Israeli intelligence officials to the NSC at the White House, and we had a meeting in which our intelligence community pressed the case that the regime of Bashar al-Assad had become prohibitive in terms of Israeli and Middle Eastern stability. The thrust of the argument was that Assad's father, Hafez, had been ruthless, but he had been somehow responsible. He had been predictable. His son was ruthless and reckless. He had collaborated with Iran in providing 60,000, 70,000 rockets to Hezbollah. He had tried to create a clandestine military nuclear facility, which fortunately doesn't exist anymore. And that his departure would be a good thing. And then the events of the Arab Spring occurred, fighting broke out there, and our general position was that we would rather see the bad guys that's not backed by Iran in Syria rather than the bad guy that is backed by Iran in Syria. And that remains our general position. We haven't really moved from it. We haven't embraced any part of the opposition, not only because we can see about 50 different elements of the opposition, but also because we don't think embracing even the good guys in the opposition would help the good guys in the opposition. We certainly welcome now the decision of the United States to back by non-lethal means the good guys in the opposition. We think it's important that America has influence in a post-Assad period. We're braced for any possibility, including the possibility of large-scale refugee influx into Israel, particularly of Christians. You know, the people who may suffer the most by the downfall of Assad are the Christians because of his allies, the Druze, the Alawites. The Christians are the only group that doesn't have a geographical center. They're dispersed, and there's no place to which they can retreat. So we're watching that very, very carefully. We've had some spillover. We've had some mortar fire. We've had some sniper fire across the border. A very strange situation has obtained along parts of the southern Golan where al-Qaeda elements are fighting the Syrian army, and they know that we have their back. Can't make this stuff up.
To the back, yes.
Ambassador.
State your name, please, and where you're from.
Ben Vaughn, Louisville, Kentucky. Having grown up in the South, we constantly find the apartheid image that is currently being projected by certain outside organizations. And the recent articles that have come out and the bus burnings that have happened with the Palestinian-only buses are bringing up images of separate yet equal. And I understand that a lot of Palestinians like these buses and the aspect that of control it gives, but we're talking about Palestinian-only buses that are controlled by Israelis and owned by Israeli companies. How are we supposed to address that issue when we're also finding such a strong apartheid opposition?
Well, here's an example of Jews trying to do something good, but they're doing something good in order to disguise something evil. That type of trope. So there was we have, during the Second Intifada, let me say, let's go back even further. Before the Second Intifada, there were about 125,000 Palestinians who were working in Israel every day, and it was vital for their livelihood. Second Intifada comes, it went down to 0. And in recent years, Israel has taken steps and taken risks to bring Palestinian workers back to Israel. Now, this means that they still have to be checked at border sites. They just can't walk and go into Israel back and forth. We can't. Or even into settlements in the West Bank. So these same Palestinians could get on buses that are Israeli buses and go into every single settlement and be checked at every single settlement. And it would take them a long time to get into the state of Israel every day to work. And we're trying to increase the numbers who work. But we have security concerns. We can't overlook that. And so what was happening, they were taking Palestinian buses, like Palestinian minibuses, that were ripping them off and charging exorbitant fees to get in and out. So we decided to create a line or several lines, that would bring workers in directly without having to go into every settlement and have they checked at every settlement and get them in at a decent price. And the Palestinians were very grateful for it. But this gets interpreted here as some type of, Rosa Parks situation, separate is equal, because that's the way the press hammered it in immediately. And here we were trying to do something good. We're trying to take steps to build up the Palestinian economy, to bring back that economic relationship that existed before the outbreak of the Second Term, to create a better environment and framework for peace, and we get slammed for it. My feeling.
Yes.
Bob Hornstein, CRC Director in Portland, Oregon. Mr. Ambassador, you touched on the flotilla incident, which is now 3 years ago. On the one hand, we, of course, read Erdogan's statement about Zionism, and we hear that Turkish officials are refusing to shake hands with Israeli officials, and on the other hand, Israel is selling military equipment to the Turkish military. Can you help us make sense of the Israeli-Turkish relationship and where you see it's going?
It's sad. Our policy toward Turkey has not changed. Turkey's policy toward us has changed. And it changed a long time ago, well in advance of the flotilla incident. Turkish spokesman today will say that they canceled their joint maneuvers with us because of the flotilla incident. It is not true. They canceled a year before. It was during my tenure when they canceled. I can understand there's certain reasons. For 70, 80 years, the Turks tried to become part of Europe. And Europe basically pushed them away, kicked them in the teeth. So they turned back to their Middle Eastern and Islamic roots. If Europe had accepted them into the EU, it would be ironic because now Turkey would be bailing out Greece. Didn't happen. And under the Erdogan government, they have turned back again to their Islamic roots in a type of Islamic government which is not far removed from that of the Muslim Brotherhood. And that is not always consonant with very close alliance with the Jewish state. But even saying that, we still value our relationship with Turkey. It's a relationship between not just Israel and Turkey, but between the Jewish people and the Turkish people, a relationship of 500 years. They took in our refugees from the Spanish Inquisition and the expulsion. Turkey is a major power in our region. We still have a flourishing commercial relationship with Turkey, not one based on tourism in the past. The 400,000 Jews that Israelis used to go to Turkey every year now go to Greece. And we are always looking for an opportunity to ameliorate the situation, not being Pollyannish, knowing that it's not going to go back to the way it was, say, before 2002. Even the Turkish army does not exist the way it existed in 2002. Many of the people we worked with are no longer free people. But we're looking for the opportunity. Erdogan, Davutoglu, do not make it easy. And every time they come out with a hateful remark, such as that remark, comparing Zionism with racism, comparing Zionism with anti-Semitism, it makes it very difficult for us. And we very much appreciated Secretary of State Kerry's condemnation of that remark.
We're running short on time, so what I'd like to do, with your permission, Mr. Ambassador, is take the last questions. Just ask your questions as briefly as you can, and then we'll answer them, and then we'll have to close.
I have a very brief statement to make.
Mr. Ambassador, my name is Alan Hillman from the JCRC in New Haven. I just want to follow up on Mr. Goldberg's question about shooting oneself in the foot. With reference to Dennis Ross's article in the New York Times last week with the 14 things that have to happen to achieve a two-state solution, almost all of them are things the Palestinians seem to have to do. With Israel, it seemed to focus a lot on the settlements. And my question is, given that fact and given we all know about the settlements, we all know how many people there are and so forth and so on, what is the rationale for continuing the present settlement policy in Israel, which seems to alienate an awful lot of people outside of Israel?
Okay. In the front, please. Yes.
Thank you. Hi, Mr. Ambassador. Connie Lawn, originally a New Jersey Jew. I caused some controversy in the White House when I asked what is the capital of Israel. Do you think President Obama will actually take a stand saying Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, make a promise to move the embassy? And also, how solid is American Christian support of Israel at this time?
That's an interesting question.
Okay, thanks. Back to the back, please.
Hi, I'm Zach. I'm from Maryland. And as a Jew who's gotten to visit Israel twice but has never gotten to tour the territories, something weighing on me is in the event that Israel is able to make a peace with the Palestinians and has to cede territory, how will my ability in the future to visit like the cave in Hebron and other holy sites in the West Bank be protected.
Okay, thank you. Front, please.
I'm Jeffrey Jackson from the Silicon Valley JCRC. Regarding the Syrian situation, if the opportunity is the wrong word, but if there was a mass of refugees ready to come over the border, is Israel prepared to do that? And it could be seen in a very favorable light in some respects.
We took in 7 wounded Druze soldiers about 2 weeks ago, and the answer to that is yes, just unequivocally yes.
Because
We're prepared.
It would be a good opportunity.
They have not come across the border yet.
Okay.
The border is mined very heavily on the Syrian side. It tends to,
Okay.
dissuade people from trying at the border. Okay. Go.
Go ahead.
All right. Let's talk about settlements. Let's take 3 steps back and understand where the settlements come from, why they exist. Settlements had a number of origins. One of them goes to the very heart of the Jewish state. The Jewish state is situated in the land of Israel. You look in your Bible, Haifa is not in the Bible. Tel Aviv is in the Bible, but it's a town in Babylonia. What's in the Bible? Hebron, Jericho, Bethlehem, Beth-El, Ophrah. These are the ancestral homelands of the Jewish people. They are our tribal lands. And for a Jewish state so constituted to tell a Jewish person that he or she cannot live on their tribal lands when those tribal lands are under its authority is very, very difficult. And I'm talking about governments right, left, up, down. The biggest settlement expansion happened during the Rabin years, Rabin and Barak years. Settlements doubled. So it's extremely difficult. It goes to the core of it goes to the essence of Israel as a Jewish state. There was also the strategic importance of broadening and thickening out Israel's borders from the pre-67 borders, which were 8 miles wide at Israel's narrowest and most populous and industrial center. So, and twice Arab armies had tried to cut Israel in half and destroy it using the West Bank as a launching pad. So if you look at 80% of those settlements are designed to thicken out the border, and it's the express reason why in Resolution 242 of 1967 that says that Israel should return territories, not the territories, because the understanding of the framers of 242 was that Israel would not be returning to the 67 borders along what was then the armistice line with Jordan, period. We understand, having said that, we understand that there's another people who regards these same territories as their tribal lands. We understand that we're going to have to make painful sacrifice. Prime Minister Netanyahu gets up in front of a joint session of Congress and says that he understands that in the event of the creation of a Palestinian state, there will be Jewish settlements beyond Israel's borders, a statement for which he got very little credit here. It was the first time the head of the Likud got up and said this. We understand this. And we understand that the settlements are annoyance to the Palestinians, and they complicate our relationship with America and the world. But they do go to the essence of our security and our meaning as a Jewish state. And we're willing to negotiate them as part of the negotiations on territory within the framework of direct negotiations, leading to a permanent 2-state solution for 2 peoples. So far, we do not have a Palestinian agreement, not only on the negotiations, but we don't even have a Palestinian agreement on the 2 peoples. They don't recognize us as 2 peoples. And we don't have any Palestinian leader who will say that the negotiations will actually end with peace, which as an end of claim, end of conflict. We don't have either of those. Until that time, to take what is now well over several 100,000 Israelis and say you can't build a balcony on your backyard is something that no state of Israel, no government can do and should do. And we've demonstrated our willingness to try to make sacrifices to say, okay, we'll freeze building in all new settlements, all new building in the settlements. Didn't bring the Palestinians back to the negotiating table. Arik Sharon tried to get a notion of the settlement blocks. It didn't make Abu Mazen accept his Olmert's offer of 2008. It hasn't worked. The settlements are not the issue. I was in the Israeli army, in active and reserve duty for 30 years. The most traumatic thing I ever went through was the withdrawal from Gaza. We ripped up 21 settlements there to try to advance the peace process, and what we got was thousands of rockets, not about settlements. How do you guarantee afterward, if we have to withdraw from areas that are sacred to the Jewish people? And, this is sort of, I don't want to put carts before horses here and say we're going to withdraw from this. We've had an experience with Nablus where we withdrew from Joseph's tomb, which is also sacred to Muslims, and the Muslims torched it. It's going to be an issue. And it's going to be it's going to be a thorny one, how we deal with that. And we hope we'll have to be creative solutions. Prime Minister Netanyahu said that through creativity and goodwill, we can even solve the Jerusalem question. So it really is going to boil down to creativity and goodwill. What we cannot do is create a peace that is going to set the stage for the next war. That's what happened in Gaza. That's what happened in southern Lebanon. We cannot create a situation where 100,000 rockets are going to find their way into the West Bank, and we will not only be within rocket range, but our house in Jerusalem will be within pistol range. We cannot do that. And there's a certain amount of, among a certain percentage of the American Jewish community that's picked in this two-state solution and made it sort of an end in itself. It's not an end in itself. A two-state solution is only good if it's a true solution, if it in fact brings us peace. Not if it brings us war. Not if it creates another existential threat. And we are in favor of the two-state solution, but only qua solution. I ask always that, one thing, you asked me, Jeffrey, it's great that I'm staying on, and I am staying on, is that my background in history helps me. I never look at any contemporary issue without seeing it in historical context. And sometimes history, people have very short historical memories because I remember Gaza, because I remember southern Lebanon, because I remember what Israel was like before 1967. Because I remember what the American Jewish community was like when you didn't have strong lobbies in the 1930s and 1940s, and 6 million Jews died because of it. I don't take any of this for granted. None of it for granted. And that is why I can proudly say right now that President Obama is going to lay a leaf at the tomb of Theodor Herzl. Very significant. Now,
and on that note, I think that's a good way to end this program. First, Jeffrey, thank you so much for being the interlocutor, and to Ambassador Oren, thank you so much for sharing so much of your time with us today. We are now adjourned, and we'll go to lunch.
Got that.